All right. Welcome back to our afternoon program. I hope you enjoyed lunch as much as I did and are ready for our next speaker, who is Olaf Schlesiger. Olaf Schlesiger is Senior Research Manager at the Advertising Research Department of SevenOne Media, the marketer of ProSiebenSat.1. And since 2015, Olaf has been Head of Research at the Screenforce genre study. Today we'd like to learn more about a project on which Olaf and our colleague Stefan Schönherr has been working during the last year. And I guess we also have some more colleagues here in the background somewhere, right? Florian and Marvin, who has been also part of the project. And a lot of more of them. Yeah. Olaf will take us today into the exciting world of ad and media research and will present the latest results of the Screenforce study, Track the Success. In this study, his team and he explored the question of how viewers and users perceive media content and what influence the situation of reception has on the effect of advertising. So please welcome with me Olaf with his slot, Track the Success, Screenforce genre study.
Ja. Ja, vielen Dank. Ich habe das Glück, dass ich auf Deutsch präsentieren darf, weil ich glaube, Sie hätten nichts davon. Ich muss vielleicht kurz mal ausholen und erklären, was überhaupt Screenforce ist. Ich glaube, das kennt auch nicht jeder. Screenforce ist ein Zusammenschluss von TV-Häusern in Deutschland, Österreich und der Schweiz. Und die haben sich zum Ziel gesetzt, wir machen zusammen Gattungsmarketing oder Marketing für die Gattung TV. Und das beinhaltet zum einen sind das Veranstaltungen, die wir machen, große Veranstaltungen, wo die TV-Häuser ihr kommendes Programm präsentieren dem Werbemarkt, aber es ist eben auch der Bereich Forschung und wir machen einmal im Jahr wirklich eine große Studie und dieses Jahr eben mit iSquare. Ich sage mal so ein bisschen das Briefing, mit dem wir an iSquare herangetreten sind. Wir haben im letzten Jahr eine Studie gemacht mit der australischen Forscherin Karen Nelson-Field. Die ist weltweit sehr renommiert, so im Bereich der Werbewirkungsforschung und ist da eigentlich immer mit derselben Methode
renowned when it comes to doing research into the impact of ads. What she does is she tests ads on various different platforms and compares the impact. So she compares the impact that, let's say, an ad on TV has and on Facebook and on YouTube. Now, what she does is technically very sophisticated. She developed a test app that you can use in order to play the ad. The people, the participants, sit at home, they use their media, and then, well, the goal is to find out about the impact of the ad. And the result is pretty much the same from many of these studies. And the effect, the impact of TV is superior to the impact of YouTube or Facebook. Now, this is a consistent result that you get in lots of studies on advertising on an international level. Now, she applied her study design in Australia and in UK and so on. And we said, of course, this is a fantastic result for us who work in the TV format. And we know that TV ads work better than a video post on Facebook, for example. But the exciting question is, why is that so? Why does one and the same ad work better on TV than it does on the digital platforms? That's what we wanted to know. That was our question. We wanted to know, what is the usage situation like? How do people use the different media? What's the emotional state they are in that moment? Are they leaned back? Are they leaned forward? What happens? What about the activation? And then, of course, the question of attention. How much attention do viewers pay to the ad they see in the different channels? Then what about the content? And what about the transition from content to advertising? That was our objective. We said there is this usage situation that the user is in when he consumes ads, so to speak. We want to understand this better. And this leads us to biometric methods. This leads us to the topic of eye tracking and skin conductivity. And we thought iSquare is the right partner here, and that's why we took them on board. Like I said, the focus is on the reception situation. And then, after the past studies that we conducted, there was some criticism, because they said, when you compare the impact of advertising on the different channels, then you should also focus on the devices. For example, for YouTube, does it make a difference if I watch YouTube ads on the smartphone or on the smart TV? Does the screen size play a role? And these were, well, topics that we were also supposed to be taken into consideration, like the second screen use as well, and then the age effects as well. In the past, we used to have a wide range of different ages in our studies. And then the criticism was, of course, that when we include people of lots of different ages into our studies, then it's normal that the TV will be more successful. So that's why we decided this time to also have a look at the younger age groups. So that was the task we had, that was the briefing we had in store for I2. So, what do you do when you want to know a bit about the situation the user is in when he consumes ads, so to speak? In the ideal case, you shouldn't invite the participants to come to a sterile lab, but you should visit people at home to do in-home media ethnographies. Now, of course, that was very hard to do. With the COVID-19 pandemic, it's very difficult to send market researchers to people's homes, to do eye tracking there, to connect the participants to cables. So that was one big challenge for I2. They had to develop a corona-proof approach to make it technically possible to investigate and analyze the usage situation in people's homes without really going there. And I2 managed to do that. And with this method, obviously, it was possible to do lots of media ethnographies. I mean, we already did in-home studies in the past where we visited like 100 participants, and that was already a lot. Because, like I said, our researchers had to visit the people at home to take care of the technical equipment. As you can see here, we did 549 in-home media ethnographies, almost 550 people in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, whom we confronted with the different channels and ads. And while we were playing, or while they were using the media, and while we were playing the ads, we were filming people on camera, and we also measured their skin conductance in order to get closer to the answers that we were looking for. And as you can see, it's almost 50% male, 50% female. It was not only in Germany, but also in Austria and Switzerland. So it was like 80% of the participants coming from Germany and about 10% from Austria and Switzerland each. So which channels did we have a closer look at? Here we have them. The classic channels and platforms that we also had a look at last year. Of course, TV, first and foremost, but also BVOD, that's broadcast view on demand. That's offerings like Join, TV Now, but also the MediaText, for example, of the first German channel, ARD. And we also tested YouTube and Facebook, and I already mentioned devices. So for BVOD and YouTube, we did not only use smartphones, but we also tested them on the large smart TVs. So we also took the factor of different devices into consideration here. Now for Facebook, we only tested the use on the smartphone, and for TV, obviously, only on the big smart TV. So we used the in-context approach that I2 offers. The aim was to, well, integrate advertising contacts into the media usage situation as naturally as possible. So the respondent shouldn't really get the feeling that he is now being confronted with a test ad. No, it was supposed to feel as natural as possible. As you can see here on TV, you have the typical TV commercial, a typical commercial break, or on Facebook you have an ad, but of course you can still scroll, and then sooner or later you will come to the video post. And then on YouTube as well, you have this kind of pre-roll where the ad comes before the actual video. Now, on this next chart, we can see a few things that Michael already talked about this morning, the various different systems we well, we looked at in this research project. The first system, that's called System 0, that's perception. Now, what does perception mean? First of all, it means the technical aspects related to the ads. For example, when people use YouTube or when they watch TV, is the audio on or off? How long do the videos last? How long do they play? So these technical variables. How much of the screen does the ad cover? Does the ad cover the entire screen? Is it like full screen? Or is it just like a small tile on the smartphone screen? So these are things that we looked into when we analyzed the perception. But then there's also System 1, that's the reaction. Like I said, we filmed people while they were using the media. We didn't do eye tracking, but we applied a method that allowed us to see the position of the head. Does the head really face the screen, or does the respondent not look at the screen? So this really told us how much attention the participant played. And then for reaction, we have some other variables that also played a role. First of all, the emotional reaction. We heard already how important emotions are in advertising and how emotions can help people remember ads. So emotions are important. It's important for ads on the various different channels to trigger emotions. And that's what we wanted to see. To what extent is a TV commercial able to trigger emotions in a different way than, for example, a pre-roll on YouTube? But also, when we talk about the reaction, we also talk about the extent to which people are activated. Are they leaned forward? Are they leaned back? The skin conductance is the main aspect that we looked at. So we really had a look at the skin conductance throughout the entire session. And then in System 2 here on the slide, that's the impact, the typical KPIs from the free to the supported, advertising recall, the intention to buy, image-related factors, you know, the classic indicators that are normally applied when you want to analyze the impact of an ad. So this is a very complex, a very holistic and comprehensive approach. And like I said, during the pandemic, the big challenge was, how do we manage to achieve all of this? Because we needed, for example, technology to measure the skin conductance. We needed to install cameras, and all of that had to be in the participants' homes. Now, what happened was iSquare sent the participants a big box with all the equipment inside and also with instructions to tell them how to install all of that. And it was remarkable to see how well that worked. In the beginning, we were a bit skeptical. We were not sure if people were actually going to be able to do that, or if only technology nerds were going to be able to do that. But it turned out very quickly that it really did work very well. People were able to install the technology. And that's really what enabled us in the end to have so many participants on board, because the researchers didn't have to go to the participants' homes. Of course, we had a phone number that the participants could dial in case they had any questions, but we didn't really have to be physically in their homes. So that was the methodology. And now let's have a look at the results. Of course, the first thing you want to see is the impact, the effect of the ads. Now, this doesn't really come as a surprise. This is pretty much what we also found out in our studies with Karen Nelson Fields, or there was a trial that was co-organized with Google, the so-called media equivalence study, with similar results. So here again, we see the typical ranking of the media with regards to their advertising efficiency. TV is on top of the list here. I mean, this slide is based on the free advertising recall. How much do people really recall the ads? VOD is number 2 here. Then on YouTube, we tested non-skippable ads, so the respondents couldn't just skip the ads. And then the number 4 is Facebook. Identical ads tested on various different platforms. Now, some of these columns you see consist of 2 parts. They are cut in half, diagonally, so to speak, because BVOD and YouTube were tested on 2 different devices each. 50% of the testing on these devices were done on the smartphone, and the other 50% on the smart TV. Now you have to say that a large share of people don't really use YouTube on their smart TV, but on the smartphone. So in a way, what we are doing here is we are probably overestimating the effect of ads on YouTube. Now the same applies to skippable and non-skippable, because what we are doing here is we are having a look at the non-skippable ads, but later on we also had a look at the ratio between skippable and non-skippable, and we could really find out that as soon as it's possible to skip the ad, of course, the impact will be lower. This doesn't really come as a surprise. If you can click it away, then of course it can't have as much of an impact anymore. Now, with Facebook, we also have this division into two parts, because there too we reacted to the market. Because we sometimes work with Facebook optimized ads. In the original study with Karen Nelson Fields, we didn't do that. There with Karen, we had identical ads on all channels, but this time for Facebook, we optimized ads. So 50% of the ads that were used on Facebook were optimized for Facebook, and the remaining 50% were identical with the ads that were used on the other platforms, just in order to see how much of a benefit there is when you optimize an ad for Facebook. So yes, I think this is a beautiful result for us, in the TV sector. It's good to see us on the first rank here and to see how well TV works for ads. But of course the question is, just why is that so? So let's talk a bit about perception. I mean, this is banal. You have to perceive something. You have to see and hear something before it can have an impact. So let's start with a very simple question. Questions. Was the audio on or off? Did you see the ad in full screen, yes or no? And here you can see the result. The first column says audio on. And of course that was the case with TV, BVOD and YouTube. Whereas with Facebook, the audio was turned on in only 34% of all cases. And of course that has an impact on the way the ad will be perceived. The same applies to full screen or not. TV and BVOD was always played full screen. The ad was shown in a full screen format in 100% of the cases, and not so often in the case of YouTube or Facebook. And we also tested BVOD on the smartphone, like I said, but still it's 100%. So that's something that you can already see here. Even when people watched BVOD contents on the smartphone, they held their smartphones horizontally, because otherwise they wouldn't have a 100% full screen coverage. So when you have a look at the percentages for audio on and audio off, and for full screen yes or no, you can see differences between the different channels. And then we had a look at how long an ad normally runs, how long it is normally played. And again, you have to say that for TV, BVOD and YouTube, it's almost the entire ad that people see. Of course, this will change as soon as you have skippable ads on YouTube, because then, of course, people won't watch 100% of the ads anymore. But as you can already see here, is that with Facebook, it's only about 50%. The average is about 7 seconds. So that's about 1/2 of the actual length of the ad, of the commercial. Now, the running time, the time that the ad is really played, that's one interesting factor. But the question is also, did people even look at the ad? Was their face directed at the screen while the ad was on, or were they looking somewhere else? So what we did here was we measured the head rotation, the head position. Is the respondent really looking at the screen? Does the face really point towards the screen? That's something that we can tell when we analyze the camera recordings. But we have to say here, this is no eye tracking. Even if the face faces the screen, the eye might still look somewhere else. And of course, when you don't have a full screen for the ad, then even when the participant looks at the screen, you don't know if he looks at the ad on the screen or at something else that's also on the screen. And that's why we don't really call this attention. We call this Zuwendung, which means turning your head towards the screen. This doesn't necessarily mean that you really look at the ad. But anyway, let's see what impact that has, or what this means for the different platforms. You can see that there's a bigger difference this time. You can see that YouTube already loses a few percentage points because people don't stare at the screen for as long as they do when the ad is shown on TV or BVOD. And on Facebook, the visual attention, the time span during which the face really is turned towards the screen, that time span is even shorter. On average, it's 5.9 seconds, or 43% of the overall duration, the overall time of the commercial, the ad. Now, as I said, you can easily make a mistake here, or these results here can be misleading when the ad is not shown in full screen mode, because if it's not full screen, you might be in a situation where the respondent looks at the screen but not at the ad, but at something else on the screen. So we had a look at the time that participants looked at the screen and compared that with the coverage of the screen, full screen or not. Like I said, with TV, it's always full screen, 100%. So the chance to perceive what's going on the screen is the same. It's 100% screen coverage. 94% of the time people look at the screen, which means the likelihood to perceive the ad is 94%. But it's different for Facebook. Here we had these 5.9 seconds. That's the time they really look towards the screen. And now you have to compare this with the average coverage, how much of the screen is actually covered by the ad, which means that in the end, with Facebook, you only have a 20% chance of perception. So that's how we try to calculate that. We had a look at the amount of time that people really look at the screen and the extent to which the screen is really covered by the ad. And then you can see that we have different kinds of perceptions in the end for the different platforms. Now, the next system, that's the reactions. Here we are talking about emotional reactions, but also about the activation. Now, we tried to measure the emotional impact as well using our webcams. With the help of an algorithm, it was possible to detect or identify basic emotions and to quantify them. Now, we didn't really break this down to each of these individual emotions because there are emotions like anger or disgust, fear, happiness, as you can see here on the photo. But what we wanted to know was the sum of positive emotions, the total of positive emotions. For how long did the respondent display or show positive emotion or any kind of emotion? So that's what we looked at as a first step. And here we have the amount of seconds during which the respondents showed positive emotions during one commercial. On TV, when there was an ad, the average respondent showed a positive emotion on his face for 5.1 seconds, whereas on Facebook, it was just 1.2 seconds. And there's something else that's very interesting, and that's the transition between content and ad. You can see that on the TV, the emotionalization of the content and the ad are pretty much on the same level. It's well balanced emotionally. In other words, on TV, the ad triggers emotions just like the rest of the content does. But we see a clear discrepancy here as far as Facebook goes. Obviously, the content that people find on Facebook is involving. It makes them emotional because typically what they read on Facebook is, well, things that they liked, things they are interested in, things that were posted by their friends. So obviously they feel very emotional about the content they see on Facebook, but the ads on Facebook don't really trigger that many emotions. So you have this discrepancy for Facebook. And even for YouTube, there seems to be this emotional discrepancy between the emotions caused by the content and the emotions caused by the ads. So that was the emotions. It is also interesting to have a look at the activation. Because when we talk about TV, we often think of a lean back medium, where people really lean back. And that's what we see here as well. We have this axis at the bottom from relaxation to tension. And we can see the activation peaks here during the ad. I wouldn't say that people fall asleep while they're watching ads on TV, but they're very relaxed, there's no tension at all. With YouTube, it's just the opposite. YouTube is standing on the very right here, where the tension is. In other words, with YouTube, you have a higher level of activation. And here again, of course, it is interesting to see the comparison between content and ads. You can see that it's quite well balanced as far as TV is concerned. So people are equally activated when they watch content or when they watch ads. That's also because we grew up that way. We all are used to that. That's what we learned. We know that there's a commercial break on TV. There will be commercials sooner or later, and we'll survive that. The commercial break doesn't really stand in our way. It doesn't disturb us. It's something we are used to. But with YouTube, it's a different thing because the ad means kind of an interruption. I'm active on YouTube. I look for something. I'm looking for a video clip I want to see. I'm looking for a content I'm interested in. And all of a sudden, they throw this ad at me. And obviously, this is really an interruption, something that disturbs people. And that's why you can really see this discrepancy between the way people are relaxed or unrelaxed when they watch a content on YouTube or when they watch an ad. And that's something that we know from psychological research as well. We once did a research project where we tried to find out why people use media, what the reasons are for people to use media. And we found out that people often use YouTube in order to take a shortcut, a cognitive shortcut, to find information very quickly, to find out something, to learn something very quickly, but also an emotional shortcut. I want to laugh very quickly. I want to be sad very quickly. I want to be moved and touched immediately. So the idea behind YouTube is often that people want to achieve something very quickly. And then comes the ad. You're trying to take this shortcut on YouTube, and all of a sudden there's the ad. And of course, in that moment, it's no longer a shortcut, because in that moment, I am not moved, I am not touched, I don't see what I'm interested in. And that's exactly what we can see here as well. With YouTube, you have this kind of rupture, this interruption of the activity the user is in that moment. And we found that a very interesting result. So, what's the situation people are in when they use the different channels? Summing up, you can say that people are well balanced when they watch TV, both as far as their emotionalization and their activation are concerned. It's like one permanent flow. With YouTube, you have this interruption that I talked about. Now, with Facebook, the thing is, you don't really look at it very closely. You don't feel very strongly about the ad. You just scroll down, and you hardly focus on the ad. You just scroll down and don't really react very strongly to the ad. And then there's BVOD. And just like on YouTube, with BVOD too, people actively select their content. They select something they want to watch, but still BVOD is somehow able to get people into a similar mood, a similar situation as the linear TV does. I mean, this was more or less the core story, as we call it, when we tried to describe the situation people are in when they use the different media channels. And like I said, we also analyzed this by device. And I find these results for the different devices very, very interesting. Like I said, we tested BVOD and YouTube on different devices. People either saw the ad while they were using BVOD and YouTube on their smartphone, or while they were using their smart TV. Now again, let's have a look at the impact, the efficiency of the ad. Here we can see quite interesting results, because YouTube obviously loses advertising efficiency as soon as people see the ad on the smartphone. But that's not the case with BVOD. BVOD on the smartphone has pretty much the same efficiency. Advertising in BVOD on the smartphone has almost the same efficiency and impact as an ad when you use BVOD on a big TV screen. So obviously the screen size doesn't matter here. There must be other factors that really ultimately decide whether or not the ad is impactful and efficient. So what about the coverage? I mean, how do people watch this? This is really interesting. On the left for BVOD, we can see that even when people use their smartphones to watch BVOD, they will still use full screen. The ad will cover the entire screen, 100%. People automatically hold their smartphones horizontally for BVOD, and they always have 100% full screen coverage. Now, with YouTube, that was different. When people used a smartphone for YouTube, only in 8% of the cases did they really use YouTube on the smartphone in such a way that the ad really covered the entire screen. In other words, normally when people use YouTube, obviously, they tend to hold the smartphone upright and not horizontally. And again, the chance of perception. Now, the chance of perception, just as a reminder, this means, what we look at here is, the extent toward the head of the user is really turned toward the screen, and the coverage of the screen. We have a look at that to see how great the perception chances are. And for YouTube, we can say that, of course, the chances of perception will be reduced for YouTube as soon as people use a smartphone. And you can see here that YouTube or ads on YouTube are very effective when people use the big TV screen. And that's what YouTube keeps highlighting. But as soon as people use YouTube on their smartphone, they will hold it upright and they will only see the ad in a very small format. And then also this break, this rupture between content and ad seems to be much greater with YouTube on the smartphone than with YouTube on TV. When you use YouTube on TV, then obviously this gets people into a TV mood, into a TV situation, and there's not this, you don't have this rupture, this discrepancy between the emotional impact of the content and the ad. Whereas when people use YouTube on a smartphone, then the emotional impact of the content will be much greater than the emotional impact of the ad. Now, we did lots of analyses. We had a look at the different age groups, and we also did this out of home because we wanted to see what it's like when people are on the go, when they are, well, let's say, when they are sitting in a cafe or when they are in a park. We had a look at all of that, and you can find all of this info on the Screenforce website. But maybe just one little summary here. What we looked at was the impact of ads and why the impact is the way it is. In order to understand that, we had a look at at the situation on the various different channels, the emotional or the emotionalization, the emotions that are triggered, also the acceptance of the ad. How much is the ad accepted? All of that plays a role when we want the ad to be impactful and effective. So here we have a look at the various different factors and the position for each of these 4 channels. 1 means first rank, 2 means second rank, and so on. On the left we have the settings, then the chance of perception, the reaction, the acceptance, and the advertising potential. Now, what this means ultimately is ads on TV are much more effective than on the digital platforms, but we can also understand why. We can now explain why TV works better for that. Thank you very much.
Ja, super. Vielen Dank, Olaf. Von mir auch nochmal herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much,
Super,
Olaf,
dass du
once
heute hier bist
again.
und das
It's great to have you
präsentierst.
here. Great to have heard your presentation. I also had the chance to talk about this on various different stages, but today I learned something new because everybody tells the story in a slightly different way.
Wir hatten uns überlegt, dass wir vielleicht so ein
Yes,
kleines,
maybe we can have.
natürlich, du hast es ja selber gesagt, du hättest jetzt auch locker eine Stunde hier.
I mean, like you said, you could have gone on talking, lots of other things you might have mentioned. You could have gone on talking for a whole hour, but I thought it might also be nice to have a little interview
Du hast es ja
now.
selber gesagt, es gibt so viele andere Ergebnisse noch.
You said there are so many other results, for example, related to the participants' age, Facebook optimized, out of home, skippable, non-skippable. Did you have any favorite part here? Anything that you as a media researcher found most surprising? Well, yes, I found this thing about the devices very interesting, where we found out that it does not just depend on the screen size, because that's the first, the first thought that crosses your mind. You say, if it works better on the TV screen than on the smartphone, that's simply because the TV screen is bigger. But obviously, it's not just the screen size, and that's interesting. I mean, different age groups, that's also very interesting, because you could say that these digital platforms play a greater role or are more successful with younger people, when in fact it's exactly the other way around. The effect of an ad on Facebook will be weaker with young people than with with older people. That's simply because younger people scroll down much faster through their feed than older people do. Which of course means that the ad won't be that impactful anymore in the end, because it will only be shown for a shorter time. So yes, we had a look at the different age groups, and that was also an interesting result.
Das ist auch so ein spannender Punkt. Haben wir ja öfter darüber
Yes, that's
gesprochen.
also an interesting part of this research project. You know, we had these Wednesday talks with our talks every Wednesday, and we discussed this part as well.
Als Haus, das ist ja Gattungsmarketing. Dann gibt es ja auch die anderen
When you
Häuser, also Google,
do such a
Facebook.
research, well,
Ja, was machen die denn jetzt damit? Also,
I mean, you work for
wie gehen die mit
TV,
der Kritik
obviously, but
um?
what
Habt ihr
do
da schon irgendwelche Reaktionen von
Facebook
denen
or
jetzt bekommen?
YouTube say about this kind of criticism? Did you get any reaction from them? Well, quite often they phone us and ask, well, for more details. Of course, they also voice criticism, but that's clear. then they will say something, last year, for example, Facebook said, yes, but that's clear. If you only look at 20-second TV ads, it's obvious that they won't work on Facebook. You took TV commercials and you tested them on Facebook, and of course on Facebook that can't work. And we took this criticism seriously. That's why we used Facebook optimized commercials, even commercials that, can be listed as best cases on Facebook. Some of the brands that we tested, some of the ads that we tested were ones that Facebook classifies as amongst their best cases on their own website. So yes, of course, we have to take criticism seriously, and we also know the researchers from Facebook or YouTube, and we get on very well with each other. But at the end of the day, we are also competitors. And of course, when we talk about advertising, it's also about money, about advertising revenues. And of course, we all try to prove that we offer the best value for the money that we get. But of course, it still has to be scientific and reasonable and credible. And that's something that we have always attached great importance to. First of all, the methodology has to be 100% clear and transparent, so that everybody can see what we did, how we did it, and if it makes sense to do it that way. I think that's the most important part, to keep the methodology of these studies transparent, so people can judge. Well, we were a bit afraid about that for a while, because you said, now let's say YouTube is non-skippable, and let's also try YouTube on the big TV screen. And then, of course, we thought, well, maybe the results in the end won't be the results that you'd like to see. But you see, we discussed this quite a lot before we started the practical part of the study. And we tried to really respond to all the criticism. So is there anything remaining? Any criticism that we haven't responded to yet? Well, yes, of course, YouTube, they complained that we tested non-skippable ads as well, which I don't understand, because, of course, non-skippable ads on YouTube will have a much greater advertising impact than the skippable ads do. And Facebook said you didn't take targeting into consideration in your project. And that's true, it was an experimental approach, but we didn't take the topic of reach into consideration either. And you see, typically when somebody places an ad, a TV commercial on TV, then they don't do that arbitrarily, but they really have a target group in mind and try to position their TV ads at the right time to make sure that they really reach their target group. So in a way, it's targeted as well. So as far as the criticism goes that we heard, there was nothing that would have knocked me off my feet, nothing that gave me the impression we have to react to this immediately and we need to start another research project very soon. So you mean we were almost too good? Well, yes, maybe. Okay, now, you said it was a big project. Obviously, Screenforce conducts such a study every year, and this year we had the pleasure to work with you and for you. Of course, I understand that when you conduct these studies, you hope to gain attention and you hope to be able to prove how efficient ads are when they are shown on TV. But who really works with these results? Is it media agencies? Is it advertising companies? Who uses these results? Well, we as the Screenforce are in close contact with the agencies. So at the Screenforce, we also have an advisory council with representatives of users and of advertising agencies as well. So when we have an idea for a research project, we go to this advisory council, advisory board, and we tell them about it and ask them what they have to say about that. And they either say, well, yes, this is exactly what we need, or they say, no, we don't need that. So we don't just start a research project just like that. No, we are an institution, which means we have to look left, we have to look right and up and down and to discuss with the people around us, including the agencies, before we start such a study. For example, for this study here, we also took the pilot on board. They even wanted to participate. They said, this is 100% what we want to know, the topic of screen size, skippable versus non-skippable, second screen usage versus no second screen usage. You know, all of these factors are very interesting when you do media planning and when you want to decide how to use your budget. on which platform with which end devices. You know, you need this kind of information to make such a decision. You need to know how advertising works on the different channels, on the different devices, and for the different target groups. So they can even further improve their famous modelings? Yes. Okay, now we also conduct lots of studies, obviously, for many different clients. But what I found very interesting was this kind of iterative process. I think Dirk Engel wrote somewhere, well, we could also do something new. We could try to, well, come up with the next big surprise. But no, what you did was almost humble. You know, you said, okay, these were our studies from the past few years. That's what we did in the past. What are your points? What would you do differently this time? So in a way, it was an iterative process, the way research should be done. And you really picked up all the questions that remained unanswered and integrated them into the study. Well, yes, of course. When you get similar results from various different studies, from different countries, from different researchers, and you always get the same results, then of course these results will have more weight than a study that only demonstrates something once. Because in that case, it might be accidents, chance, luck, or whatever. But as soon as you're able to replicate results, they will become significant. And that's why this study was so important to us. We wanted to demonstrate we wanted to confirm once again that the impression that we gained over the past few years is really correct. We are still able to confirm what we said last year, and we can even give you some additional explanations. Well, yes, and the results from the study came out in June. And obviously, the prices that companies have to pay when they want to place ads on TV have increased by 40%. And I think this is just because of our study. Yes, exactly. That's why we did this study. Okay, very well. Now, of course, we are also proud to have cooperated in this work. Matthias, I think, you know, he really had a headache last autumn when you contacted us with this inquiry, because he really asked, how can we do that? How will we be able to do that? We had to change the methodology. And like you said in the beginning, with new methods, you have to figure out, first of all, if they work. So we had a few tests, a few trials, a trial phase to see if the methods work. And now we have methods that work. You know, we see a big potential there. We almost have this feeling that we won't even go back to the previous methods, to the previous methodologies, because with this new method, we found out quite a lot. Of course, we didn't have the accuracy of the eye tracker, but you are a media researcher. So do you think that this methodology will continue to play a role in the future? Yes, I think so, because first of all, we have so many cases, so many participants, not just 80 or 90 or 100. I mean, in the past, 100 used to be a lot already, but here we have 500. And apart from that, normally when you do an in-home project, you have a market researcher sitting on the couch. You visit people at home and sit down on their couch. You sit right next to the participants, and that's not very natural. It's much more natural when the participant is home alone or with his partner, but not with the researcher. And I think there are many, many other things that you might investigate and analyze in this context. For example, the topic of brand associations. What kinds of associations are connected to certain brands? And what's the contribution that advertising makes to brand perception? And I think we could use a similar methodology to find out about that as well. Okay, that would have been my last question. What are the topics that you want to have a closer look at? Of course, brand associations. But I know we have some colleagues from Oculid here as well today. Oculid is also a Berlin-based startup company. And what they do is they do webcam eye tracking with smartphones. So who knows, maybe for the next study, we can even use eye tracking again. And well, apart from that, well, of course, things will go on, things will develop further. So do you already have the next study in mind, the next project? Well, yes, of course. We are always under pressure in a way. In May or June, we always have to present results from the study during the Screenforce days. So of course we are always thinking about a new study, but this time it will go, or next year, the study will go into a completely different direction, because we have now taken experimental approaches for 2 years, and it's quite clear that next year we will really have a look at real purchasing data again. We will focus on modeling or meta-modeling approaches next year. At least that's what I think. Okay, well, you can add that to your portfolio and then we can take you on board. Well, of course, that's a pity, but maybe we can still have our talks on Wednesday. On Wednesdays? Yes, we will keep talking on Wednesdays. We'll continue with our Wednesdays talks. Well, yes, and you can, of course, also send us the briefing. We'll think about it. Maybe we can also come up with some interesting ideas. So thank you very much for the time being.
Ganz lieben Dank, Olaf.
Thank you,
ich finde es
Olaf.
natürlich auch total bemerkenswert,
Of course, this was
welche
really
Möglichkeiten dann
remarkable. It
plötzlich
was
neue
remarkable
Methoden
to
entstehen,
see
wenn bestimmte
all the new
Restriktionen zum Tragen
options you have when you develop new methodologies. And you develop these new methods simply because of the current restrictions. So in a way, you set a new standard. Any questions? Yes, I have a question, and I think there's also a question from the audience. Yes, I just wanted to say something. It's not really a question, it's just something I wanted to say. Two things, actually. First of all, when we look back into the past, I have to say thank you very much. Together with Quelle, you were our first client. I think you still had a different name back then, but still, we had a phone call in 1999 and you had a project for us where we were supposed to use the eye tracking. You're still around, Quelle is no longer around, but you are. So once again, thank you very much. I think this project also showed you that there is this psychological truth. When you go into more detail, you can understand the impact of ads better. So thank you very much for this, also this intellectually inspiring cooperation. We had a lot of enthusiasm about this project. And of course, we often like to talk about attention. Do people pay attention? But that's not all. So it's good to talk about perception and then impact. I think the way you talk about it in this study was very, very good, very impressive. And of course, I know very much about the strength of TV ads, but these skip points, they were really very interesting to me. And then, of course, also BVOD. That's very interesting. This was also very interesting information that you found. And there's a second thing I'd like to say. You know, I don't want to turn this into a PR campaign, but still, I'd like to advertise the work of the Technical University of Berlin. Stefan, Julia, Philip, Ansgard, Michael, they all studied at the Technical University of Berlin. We went to the same colloquium with Professor Uppheim, and he always said, when you want to see a good master thesis, have a look at the one that Olaf wrote. Olaf wrote a fantastic master thesis. So that's the impression that we still have of you today. Thank you very much. Okay, and there was one question coming in from the virtual audience. Olaf, do you still have your microphone? No, he doesn't have a microphone anymore. Okay, then Stefan will have to answer. There was a question about the prospects, the future. Maybe, Stefan, you can answer on behalf of him the TikTok question. The TikTok, would that be relevant for the future? You mean, do we want to test TikTok as well? Well, with Karen Nelson Field last year, we also included Instagram. And the advertising impact of Instagram was comparable to Facebook. In other words, it lagged behind. Now, when I think of TikTok, you see, I work in the TV sector, so TikTok is not so relevant to us. If they want to do research, they can do that for themselves. There is not such a lot of competition between TV and TikTok, not like there is between TV, YouTube, and Facebook. And that's why it was important to us to show how these three channels compare. And that's why we didn't take TikTok on board.